Welcome to tonight's panel discussion, Understanding Anti-Semitism in 2025. My name is Mary Deal. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I currently serve as the Franklin Interfaith Council President. I am honored to be here tonight and am so grateful for this much-needed discussion. I get to introduce our moderator, Jeff Roy. He is our state representative from the 10th Norfolk District. He was elected in 2012 to represent residents in Franklin and Medway. Since 2013, Jeff has been part of a legislative team that has addressed the issues of education, economic development, healthcare, substance use disorder, criminal justice, civil rights, and social equity. Before that, prior to that, he also chaired Franklin's anti-bullying task force, and I think that he is well prepared to moderate this discussion. On a personal note, I first met Jeff Roy on this stage, actually. We were in a musical together, and so he's done a couple of those. So little known fact. Jeff Roy.
Well, thank you, Mary, for that kind introduction, and thank you to everyone for being here. And Mary, especially, thank you for directing me in how to sing and dance in a musical. I may be a rock and roller in a band sometimes, but I have no rhythm, so I'm a horrible dancer, and you saved me. At least people didn't notice how bad I was. But I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. And let me begin by reminding you that so many years ago, the Maccabees showed that a small measure of oil could provide light and outlast every expectation. It is in that spirit that tonight we use that oil to shine a light on the problem of anti-Semitism with the hope that we can equip everyone with the knowledge, the skills, and the confidence to intervene. In Franklin, like in too many communities, we experienced some anti-Semitic incidents that shook the community. We held vigils and saw an outpouring of support from the community. And tonight is a continuation of the community response in the form of a conversation. In 2014, I journeyed through Israel as part of the community leader tour with the Jewish Community Relations Council, and that's how I met Jeremy Burton. That trip led to my work on the Genocide Education Act, which became law in Massachusetts in 2021. And that was just a beginning, knowing full well we had a lot more work to do. We know that education is key to combating hatred, studying the core features of anti-Semitism, the driving dynamics, the politics, the ideology, and psychology is profoundly important for an understanding of human behavior. And that's what this program is all about tonight. We have a stellar panel to dive in on the topic, and you'll hear what anti-Semitism is and how it has evolved over time. You'll hear about personal experiences as a parent, teacher, rabbi, and public official. You'll hear about the psychological impacts and strategies for decreasing hate. And finally, you'll hear about what Massachusetts is doing in terms of communal responses. And let me briefly introduce the panel. I could go on and on about these spectacular people that we have today, but I think you'll grasp that as soon as they open their lips tonight. We have Jeremy Burton, the CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Boston. Rabbi Rachel Putterman is here representing Temple Etz Chaim in Franklin. Dr. Miri Bar Halpern is the Director of Trauma, Training, and Services at Parents for Peace, and she's a lecturer at Harvard Medical School. She's joining us via Zoom tonight. Dr. Michael Rubin is in the Uxbridge High School principal, and he's the president of Temple Etz Chaim. And State Representative Simon Cataldo is from Lexington, Massachusetts. He needed a passport to get out here all the way to Franklin. But most importantly for tonight's conversation, he is the co-chair of the Special Massachusetts Commission on Combating Anti-Semitism. So I want to say thank you to so many who made all of this happen tonight, beginning with the Franklin Interfaith Council. I met many of the folks at the vigil that occurred earlier in the year. I want to give a special shout out to Kathleen McAdams, Rabbi Putterman, my researcher Elise, who is up in that booth way up in the back, and our great panelists. They're coming here to Franklin because they care about the topic, they know about the topic, and they want to converse with you about the topic. So thank you to everyone who is involved in getting this together. So Jeremy, you are our kickoff for tonight.
Okay.
It would be nice if you could open up by giving us the history of anti-Semitism, when it started and how it's evolved over time. And this is not a 3-hour lecture, but if you could get the ball rolling and tell us what's going on here.
Happy to, and thank you for organizing this evening's event, and thank you all of you who are here tonight. And Rep. Roy is being very modest about his leadership on issues of genocide education and anti-Semitism. And he was doing that before he went to Israel, and he fought long and hard for 8 years to get that bill done. The short history of anti-Semitism in 3 minutes flat. And let me do this. I'm going to confine myself, for the purpose of tonight's conversation, maybe it comes up later, to the Western tradition. So I'm not going to talk about anti-Semitism, for example, in the Islamic world or in Eastern societies, strictly in the Western context. For the moment, it'll be simpler. And some of us, certainly some of us Jews, like to joke that we've been dealing with anti-Semitism since the pharaohs in Egypt. But I think for the purpose of understanding how anti-Semitism appears in the Western tradition and how Jews have experienced it, it's best to date it to the 4th century, and specifically to the Emperor Constantine and St. Augustine. And the specific reason that I like to start there is because while there were challenges, and certainly like Jews or the Jewish people in the context of ancient civilizations had challenges and issues and conflict, they were probably mostly in the context of it was just another tribal group. It wasn't like the Hittites hated the Jews more than they hated the Canaanites, and it wasn't like the Babylonians cared more about the Jews than they did about the Phoenicians. They were just tribes. And even in the Roman context, by and large, Jews were just like any other subject people until that moment in the 4th century. What happens then are 2 important things. One, the emperor becomes a Christian, Constantine, and Christianity becomes the state religion of the Roman Empire. And from that point on, in a series of progressions over many different emperors, you see state-sanctioned discrimination. Jews excluded from civil service, Jews prohibited from certain ownership, other legal sanctioning of Jews as a class by the state, and of course the state that is the formative state of Western civilization. And you see with Augustine, you see a definition of what is the role or place of Jews in Western, now Christian civilization, which is specifically not kick out the Jews or kill the Jews, but the Jews should remain as a witness, because for Christians in that time, to have the Jews present was proof that, one, the Jewish Bible, which they call the Old Testament, or some of you call the Old Testament, is actual and legitimate, and the prophecies about Jesus are authentic because we see that there are people of that group. And second, that Jews must remain part of civilization so that through their suffering and downtroddenness, we prove the authenticity of accepting Christ, and that they are the other who are bad, who are evil for not having accepted our Savior. And so the combination of state-sanctioned persecution and a particular understanding as the Jew as the necessary, present, and bad other that validates certain parts of our civilization, from that point on get baked into Western civilization.
How is anti-Semitism similar and different from other forms of prejudice or racism?
Well, I think it's important to say that anti-Semitism, if you're going to say something started in the 4th century, it has evolved over time. I think for the purpose of this conversation and other conversations, I start there because it's important to say that anti-Semitism or Jew hatred, and we can talk about the word anti-Semitism, which is really a 19th century invention by German Jew haters who wanted a scientific racism, and that is what it was, scientific racism term, that they gave a technical term to it, anti-Semitism, but Jew hatred from the get-go has evolved and shape-shifted itself in how it shows up throughout Western civilization, but it is baked into the DNA of Western civilization in a way that other isms and hatreds may not necessarily be baked into the DNA of Western civilization. I think many people in this room would probably say, I certainly would, that anti-Black racism is baked into the DNA of the American story. In a similar way, Jew hatred is baked into the DNA of Western civilization. Jew hatred has evolved over time, but there are 3 consistent patterns that we see, whether it is the kind of Jew hatred that happens during the Crusades, where it's like we have to cleanse the Holy Land of the infidel, and on our way there, we're going to slaughter a lot of Jews, or it's the Black Plague and who's responsible, the Jews must be poisoning the well, or a child goes missing 1,000 years ago in England, and it must be the Jews kidnapped the child to bake his blood into our Passover matzah. Or since then, we need to unify Spanish identity in the 15th century, so we're going to, say that Catholic identity is inherent to Spanish identity, and the Jews must leave, as must others, and on, all the way up to, say, the Nazi Germany, where it's a really blood and soil version. There are 3 consistent threads. 1, there is a nefarious power that Jews have in our society, above board and under board. 2, Jews are particularly nefarious in our attitudes, in our just fundamental evil nature about other people, like the idea that we would kill little children to bake their blood into our matzah, that falls to nefariousness. And 3rd, it's the conspiracy theory, that they're doing things secretly. They're quietly manipulating society. They're manipulating kings. They're manipulating Western civilization. Those 3 things, Jewish power, excessive power, nefariousness, and conspiracy theory, they all start with that early stage. They are the other within. They're the rejectors of our civilization, and they need to be kept but persecuted. And it involves, and you see it throughout the next 1,800 years in every place and time in Western civilization, which is different from some other hatred, say homophobia, which there is a particular hatred of a kind of person for who we are, I'm gay, who we are, what we do, what we represent in some context, whatever that is. And I'm not going to break down homophobia or anti-Black racism or gender-based bias, but there's something particular about the Jewish hatred that are those 3 things. And it's important to understand that while combating anti-Jewish hatred cannot be done in a silo without combating other forms of hatred and bigotry, it has to be understood uniquely and particularly for the ways in which it represents and shows up, particularly as we see it so much so in the modern time in this country now, this conspiracy theory, this power narrative that emerges on both the left and the right, and this idea of Jewish nefarious behavior and attitudes. Those are the things that make it unique.
And before I move on, I want to ask you one other question is, can you talk to us about the relationship between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism?
Oh boy.
And you have 2 minutes.
Sure. So I need to start with, for those of you who are Jewish in the room, you're going to nod your heads. For those of you who are not Jewish, I'm sure you've heard this. two Jews, three opinions. We don't all agree on a lot of things. So I'm going to say some things that I think and understand, but also say that there's a great deal of diversity of thought in the Jewish community about this. At the simplest level, to understand what an anti-something is, one has to define what the it is. So anti-Semitism technically is the opposition to Semites, which in 19th century Germany meant the Jews, not all Semites. It did not include the Arabs in the way the term was invented and understood. Anti-Zionism, if we want to talk about anti-Zionism, let's understand what Zionism is. And a lot of people, and this is why it gets messy, a lot of people have different definitions and understanding of what Zionism is. And there are various threads within Zionism. I'm not going to do a 100-year history of Zionism, cultural, religious, political, etc. Zionism. But at the basic center of any of those definitions, Zionism, or at least the political Zionism that led to the establishment of the State of Israel, is the belief that Jews have the right to national autonomy in their homeland like any other people. You can dislike that state, what it does, what it stands for, what its government is, but the essence of Zionism, as political Zionism, is the right of the Jewish people to have the same national rights as any other people. So anti-Zionism, in its simplest sense, is the opposition to Jews having the same rights as other people, groups, as groups. That's the basic. So if saying that Jews do not have the same rights as a group, as a people, as any other people is what you are opposing, that would probably be considered anti-Semitic by most people and most working definitions of anti-Semitism. That is not to say that I'm saying anti-Zionism is always anti-Semitism. To be blunt, there are like anti-nationalists who probably spend their weekends studying Esperanto and organizing conferences to oppose the existence of France and Germany and invest all effort in like the EU. And that kind of anti-nationalism consistently is not anti-Semitic in its anti-Zionism. It's also true that I would say personally, and this would be controversial in Jewish spaces as well, that for many Palestinians themselves, who when they say they're anti-Zionist, are talking about what they experience in their relationship with a state that in a context of occupation and their oppression, I would not personally say that most Palestinians' expression of anti-Zionism through that lens equals anti-Semitism because there is a particular experience they have. What I would, just the last comment I would make is, regardless of whether you agree with my framing of Zionism and anti-Zionism, and therefore Semitism, anti-Semitism, I do think it is fair to say that most places in which anti-Zionism gets expressed, at least within the European and the North American context over the last several years, whether or not as explicitly or implicitly anti-Semitism, there is often clear anti-Semitic tropes, behaviors, and statements that are slapped on. So for example, one might go to a protest against the actions of the government of Israel. Protesting the actions of the government of Israel, not anti-Semitic. One might at that protest say, somebody else says we should dismantle the state of Israel for its evils. We can argue, is that anti-Semitic, is it not anti-Semitic? I might say it is. When that person then says, and by the way, this kind of thing happened as recently as this week in New York at a rally, somebody's like, prominent public officials like saying that essentially because of this power that the Jews have over the American budget, therefore you in New York City don't have affordable housing, that would be anti-Semitic in my mind. And that often is not happens in those spaces, which doesn't mean everybody's anti-Semitic or everybody thinks or intends to be anti-Semitic, but we see the anti-Semitic tropes coming up over and over again.
Well, as I was listening to you describe these things, I was thinking of our trip to Israel and how at the end of every talk, we'd hear the phrase, "It's complicated." And you highlighted that again tonight. Mike, I want to shift over to you, and now that we have the general history and some of the definitional pieces, Can you tell us whether you personally have experienced anti-Semitism, and if so, in what context?
First, thanks everyone for being here, and to the Interfaith Council for helping Representative Roy organize this. So it's interesting. The concept of experiencing anti-Semitism for me has sort of like been baked into my consciousness since I was a little kid. My daughter, who was supposed to be here and is sick, doesn't experience it the same way that I do, which in some ways is a positive, and in other ways is kind of scary because it's still there, it's still salient, it's just different. As a kid, I had kids throwing pennies at me when I was walking home from school. As a young adult, I heard things from people, some people who I would even consider friends that, you would say were anti-Semitic, tropes or stereotypes that were enforced. So it's been there since I was a little kid. My grandparents were, on my mother's side, were Holocaust survivors. My mom and most of my maternal side of my family are Israeli. So hearing the complications of like the Israel, my grandfather having gone there and fought for the War of Independence, and his opinions about some of the Muslim countries was complicated growing up in a very diverse community. I grew up in Malden. And now professionally, there was a little bit of a lull where it wasn't, again, as salient or as pervasive. And now professionally is in the role of being an educator and as a school administrator and as a president of a congregation. It's shocking to me how many experiences I have on an almost monthly basis that are in some way tied to some form of anti-Semitism, whether it's a student who is drawing a swastika on a desk and not necessarily understanding the gravity of that decision, or something that students say or do inadvertently or advertently. And as recently as last year, and Representative Cataldo mentioned that he saw some of the press about it. I sat in an audience of a statewide, a regional technology conference where a woman spoke very outwardly and very eloquently about the need for our society to understand the other side of the Holocaust. That the Jewish side of the Holocaust had been espoused too deeply and too consistently, and there's another side that we've ignored for too long. And when I asked to have a conversation about that topic, I was basically told, no, you're crazy. That's not what she meant. Well, I'd love to have a conversation about what she meant, because I took a lot of history classes, and I think I was absent the day they taught the other side of it. And I'm not saying that to be tongue-in-cheek. I think that's the reality of the sort of widespread ignorance that can sometimes be there. So I to answer the question, yes. I mean, I've experienced it. I've experienced it a lot. It's been, in some ways, there are days when the experience is something where we have to seek to understand and teach. And in others, it really does come from this very visceral, angry place of folks who are choosing not to understand the other. And I just happen to be the other. In my case, it's my religion. If it weren't me, it might be someone's skin color. It might be their sexual orientation. And so it's not necessarily centric to me as a Jew as much as it is centric to me as the other. And that is another challenge that I think we all are experiencing in some ways when we're talking about anti-insertism.
Now, you have an interesting family story involving your mother, and I'd love for you to share that with the audience. And also, I recall when we had met, you talked to me about a high school student that was sent to you for discipline without naming names or identifying. I think those stories shed a lot of light, and I was wondering if you could.
Yeah, I mean, to be very candid, I mean, my mom came here at 13. She was supposed to leave Israel in June of 1967, and this little skirmish called the Six-Day War started. And my grandfather was actually supposed to leave. He went in to turn in all of his military paraphernalia on May 30th, and they said, "When are you leaving?" And he said, "Well, my flight's on June 2nd." And they said, "Not so fast." But he was one of 14 boys, all boys, and he was the only one who lived past 1946. There were 12 that died in the Holocaust. There was one who was killed by Jordanian soldiers in the Israeli War of Independence. My grandmother was one of 9. She was fortunate to survive with 2 of her sisters, but she was hidden in an attic for 2.5 years in Poland. I was fortunate enough to meet the family that hid her. They concealed her in the attic for 2 years, and when she was discovered, she was able to pass herself off as Polish, which meant she went to a labor camp and not a death camp. And actually, that's where my mother's sister was born. She was born there in 1944 in the camp, and my grandmother had very glamorous job. She would take German uniforms that had been shot up from the field, and she would clean up the holes and restitch them so they could go back to other German soldiers back out in the field. And she did that for 2 years before she made her way first to Italy and then to one of the boats to Israel. My grandfather's story is far more fascinating, and we could talk about it all day, because he ended up as a 15-year-old in the Russian army and liberating the Ukraine and through Romania, and his path to Palestine at the time was very circuitous. The one thing that I think, to use the story that I think Representative Roy is referring to, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I had this boy who was sent to the office, and I was actually, observing another class. I was in a math classroom, and the secretary, whose name I can use, Becky, called me to the office and said, "You need to get back here right now." I said, "Okay, I'm on my way." When you're the principal and the secretary says, "Get to the office right now," you come. And she's in the office, outside the office, and she's that like special shade of red that's like purple. And I'm very worried about her like actually having like a cardiac right there and I said, "What's the matter?" She goes, "You're going to be really upset." I said, "What's the matter?" She goes, "The boy in your office, he said something really bad." Well, okay, kids say bad things. We'll deal with it. She goes, No, it was really bad. A million things are going through your heads right now about what really bad could be. And so I go in, I said to him, I go, "Johnny," his name was not Johnny, and I said, "Johnny, what happened?" He goes, "I said something bad." I said, "We really got to get to the bottom of what this bad is, right?" And so he says, this girl, we'll call her, whatever, Susie. Susie was talking about her job and how much money she makes. And I looked at her and I said, "You're such a B." She called it B. I said, "Yeah, they're calling somebody the B word. That's not nice. But that can't be why you got sent down here." And he said, "No, I think that's it." I said, "Okay, well, what else did you say?" It was, "Well, at some point I said, 'Why are you being such a Jew?'" And I looked at her and I go, "What does that have to do with it?" "Well, she's talking about money. You know how Jews are." I said, "That's interesting. I looked at him, I said, "Have you ever met somebody who's Jewish before?" And he looks at me and he goes, "I don't think so." I said, "Well, gee, man, why don't we see if we can't dig one up for you?" "I'll be right back." So I go out of the office and the secretary's standing there and she puts her hands on me and "You're not leaving. We're not like this in this community. You're okay, right?" I said, "Oh yeah, I'm great. I'm fine. I'm about to teach this kid a lesson that he is never going to forget." So I walked back in and I sat down next to him and I said, "Hey, Johnny, I got a couple questions for you." "Yeah." I said, "Have we ever talked about money?" "No." "Have I ever been disrespectful or like tried to impose like my power on you?" "No." "Well, here's a real shocking one for you. I'm Jewish." And the kid looked at me and then he went, "Oh boy." And then he burst into tears. And I said to him, "What are you upset about?" He goes, "Well, I didn't mean to disrespect you. It's just what people say." And I said, "It's just what people say. So when we seek to understand, now you've actually met a Jewish person, we're not all. All is a dangerous word to say, Johnny. All is a very dangerous conversation for us to have. Are there Jewish people who are, really good with money? Sure. Are there Jewish people who are wealthy? Absolutely. Are there Jewish people in the media? All these things that he had said to Susie. So then we called Mom, and the first thing out of Mom's mouth was, "We didn't raise him that way." And I said, I understand, and I understand you're upset, but his lesson in all of this is we're going to talk about anti-Semitism. We're going to give him an assignment about what that means, and he's going to get to know me on a very different level so that he will never have make that statement ever again. So when he walked across the stage 2 years later at graduation, he walked by, and I shook his hand. I said, "Remember our first conversation?" And he looked at me and he goes, "Yeah." I said, pulled him in. I said, "Smile for the camera." and handed him his diploma, and I gave him a fist bump, and I said, "You turned out okay." And he goes, "I am still so sorry." And I said, "Don't be. You're better today than you were yesterday. You're better today because we made it an educational experience. I didn't get mad, but he just didn't know." And I think that gets to the core of where a lot of ignorance comes from, is they're just repeating something he saw online or repeating something he didn't know any different. And, I'd like to think he's a better person for it. When his mom came in to get him that day because he was really emotional and didn't want to go back to class, I think she was more horrified that he had said that, which also helped. I mean, to be fair, that also helped.
Well, thank you, Mike. And before I go to Rabbi Putterman, I want to take this opportunity. We have a lot of community leaders here tonight, and I want to point out a few who have joined us. From Senator Ed Markey's office, Jim Cantwell is here. And from the Franklin Town Council, we have Ted Cormier-Ledger. And thank you both for being a part of this. And I know, Jim, you get a long way from Marshfield, so thank you. So, Rabbi Putterman, you've been a leader in your temple and in your life, and would like to hear your experiences with anti-Semitism, and in particular, what has been your experience as a Jewish leader since October 7th.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you to Representative Roy. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the Interfaith Council. Thank you to all of you for showing up. There's a lot going on in the world right now, and there's a lot going on in all of our lives, so I appreciate you taking the time to be here. So my experience of anti-Semitism, growing up, I didn't actually personally experience anything. My sister did in our high school. There was the football team, peed in her locker and drew a swastika on her locker. But I was sort of a nerdy, quiet kid, and she was a mean girl cheerleader. So she was sort of more front and center, but I had nothing. Literally, well, other than the orthodontist who we were looking at a x-ray of my jaw and my face, and he was like, "Well, I can fix her teeth, but you're gonna have to go to somebody else for her nose." Yeah, so, but anyway, fast forward, I had a bunch of good decades, as I think many of us did, until 10/7, till October 7th. So I'm going to tell you two stories, post-10/7 stories. So the first is I was working on a college campus, a small liberal arts campus, as the Hillel director. So on small campuses, the Hillel director is also like the campus rabbi, sort of does everything. And on November 14th, 2023, there was a huge rally down in DC where 300,000 people showed up in support of Israel. And I went with a bunch of my students down there. And there were many organizations sponsoring it. And I went personally, my community knows this about me, and I'm representing myself because the peace tent was there. So there were these lefty orgs that I, at that point, was very affiliated with. And they were there, and I felt like I would feel comfortable there. So we went, and it was a very powerful experience. It was the first time post 10/7 that I felt relaxed and safe because I was with 300,000 Jews. And I ran into the rabbi that married us, and I ran into an ex-boyfriend, and I ran into my Hebrew professor from Hebrew College, which was pretty crazy, right, to be amidst 300,000 people and running into these really cool faces. So when we got back to campus, one of my students posted on our Instagram account some pictures of us at the rally. And then a couple weeks after that, I participated in an interfaith vigil praying for all the victims of what was going on over there. And I read a poem for peace at that vigil. There was like the Buddhist chaplain spoke, the Christian, it was an interfaith thing. So within, I think, like a couple days of that vigil, there's a platform you probably don't know about called Yik Yak. Does anybody know what Yik Yak is? No. So Yik Yak is this really poisonous social media platform where all the posts are anonymous. And it's sort of grouped by a geographical region, so you can only sort of post in your region. So these college kids post really nasty stuff because there's no way, to trace it. So on Yik Yak, somebody posted, they cropped a picture of me at the Israel rally and said, she read how could she read a prayer for peace or something like that? F that B. So that's story number one. Story number two, last summer, I went to Israel 8 days after the war with Iran so I could do some professional development with a liberal Zionist organization called the Shalom Hartman Institute. And because of the war, they cut their program a little short. It was too expensive to change my flight, so I find myself in Israel with a week. I did some high holiday prep, don't worry. But I also wanted to use my time, so I contacted Rabbis for Human Rights and asked if I could do some volunteering with them in the West Bank. So I went to the West Bank to do something called Protective Presence. My congregants already heard me talk about this at holidays, which is where volunteers show up to try and prevent settlers from harassing Palestinians in the West Bank. So I spent a day doing that, which was very powerful on many levels. And so, and a big part of what we did was spend some time with 2 Bedouin families who had been displaced. I'm not going to go into great detail about that. My congregants already heard about it. So a couple weeks, but my congregants have not heard this story. A couple weeks after I get back from that trip, I'm in my local Whole Foods. I'm near the produce section, and I have a little, backpack, and I had a little hostage pin. They're about an inch big, right? The yellow things that many of us were wearing on my backpack. They're the pins that show solidarity with the hostages. And I was also wearing a T-shirt that was for Chagiga, which is a Jewish radio program on WERS, right, on the Emerson radio station. So I was pretty visibly, I wasn't wearing a kippah, but I was, whatever. So I'm standing there picking out an avocado or something, and I hear someone's yelling at me. And someone's screaming at me about dead Palestinian babies. And I turn around, and I see this woman, youngish, staring at me. And I walked right up to her, gently, not like, I slowly walked up to her. And I said, "Were you talking to me?" And we just held, we just held each other's gaze. And her rage and her anguish was like rolling off of her. And when I've told this story, I went into chaplain mode, like I felt her pain, so to speak. And I was also deeply shaken up, right? Like I'm being screamed at in Whole Foods. And at that point, I wasn't even thinking about my yellow hostage pin or my I was like, I don't, like what? And then she said, "Are you just gonna," she said, "I don't even know you. are you just going to stand there and stare at me? So I kept holding her gaze for a couple beats, and then I decided to walk away. And in my mind, as I'm walking away, I'm like, yeah, you don't know me. And so I think both of these stories, the Yik Yak post, how dare I say a prayer for peace when the whole reason I went to the Israel rally is because the peace camp was there, and this woman screaming at me about dead Palestinian babies when I just spent time in the West Bank with living Palestinian children, exemplify prejudice, right? There's this erasure. There's this clumping me in and with making assumptions about who I am because I care about Israeli hostages, because I love the state of Israel, and I'm going to go to a rally to support it. And I care about Palestinians, which is the two Jews, three, like we are, as what I kept saying to the Hillel kids over and over, we are not a monolith, right? These assumptions that people are making about us are really poisonous and toxic and clearly tie into, I believe, the Western civilization, ancient hatred of Jews, which is now being glommed onto the actions of the state of Israel, which we're being held to account for. So anyway, I don't think anti-Semites really care about who we are. They just want to fit us into their categories.
Let's see if oh, there we go. All right. Well, you three have set this up quite well. I'm going to turn it over to Representative Cataldo to talk to us. Now, you have been appointed by the Speaker of the House to chair a commission on anti-Semitism. And first of all, thank you for doing that, and thank you for all the great work you've done. Could you talk to us about what that commission is all about, what your object is, and what you hope to come out of that process?
Absolutely. How's the audio? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So great to be here. I want to thank the Interfaith Council, all the moderators, the police officers who are here, ensuring that we can safely exercise our First Amendment rights. And the moderator, most of you know him as Jeff or Rep. Roy. I know him as Leader Roy. He's a member of House leadership, and among his many responsibilities in that role is actually to babysit me. The Speaker appointed him to sit next to me. It was someone else in leadership last session. They apparently didn't do a good enough job. And maybe he's not doing a good enough job either, because now I have to visit his district once a month, apparently, just to check in like a parolee. So glad to be here. I'm from Concord, actually, not Lexington. That's a deep insult.
They're not the same town?
They're not the same town. The revolution started in our town. Lexington people just ran away from the Royal Army. We fought back. But it's so great to be here. I did just want to ask you, because I don't know any of you besides a couple of friends who I just met, and Jim Cantwell. How many of you are, if you don't mind me asking, you don't have to participate in this, but how many of you are Jewish? And how many of you are not? So this is really good. This is important. We're going to talk about the special commission in a second, but you have my word that what the Interfaith Council is doing will be reflected in our special commission recommendations. It is very important. There is a lot that government leadership can do, that the state apparatus, that local school districts can do. But I personally believe, having now worked on this for a year with Jeremy and others, that there's nothing more important than the cultural change that has to happen with respect to anti-Semitism and other forms of bias and hate, and interfaith councils are critical in that. So Massachusetts, in its legislature, was the very first and still the only in the country to file a bill in the state legislature to create a state commission on combating anti-Semitism. That bill was, you can clap for that, sure. That bill was filed in the Senate. It was defended in the House. And I say it was defended in the House because we really did have to play defense against a coordinated campaign to not let this happen. Now, for context, this state legislature in Massachusetts has a special commission on nearly everything. There is a special commission on anti-racism. There is a special commission on anti-LGBTQ hate. There is a special commission on Polish heritage. There is a special commission on mosquito control. If you go on our website, there is a special commission on everything. But there were some very coordinated and active groups who did not want there to be a special commission on anti-Semitism. And they submitted a white paper with every anti-Semitic trope you can think of. And we on the House played defense, and there was absolutely no flinching by the House Speaker, by the leadership team, by the Senate President, who is Jewish, and the Senate Minority Leader, who is Jewish, or by our governor or Lieutenant Governor. And that is something that's very important for you to know. So with that confidence, and it passed unanimously in both chambers, with that confidence, we set about in taking a fairly direct and bold approach to what we were going to do. And what we were trying to do is write a playbook for how to address anti-Semitism, which was rising in our community, is rising. It was recently reported that in 2024, for the first time, according to state data, Jews were the most common victims of hate crimes out of any group since 1991, when they started tracking anti-Semitic hate crimes. And so far more than Black residents of Massachusetts, even though there are far more Black residents than Jewish residents, which is of course not to say that anti-Semitic hate is more important or somehow special or needs to be elevated among others. But a lot of the resistance to this is just a general theory that Jews don't count. We don't count the Jews when we talk about anti-bias, hate, discrimination. And it just so happens that when we look at the reputable data, it tells us that Jews, I happen to be Jewish, and very proudly so, are more likely to be targeted. 84% of religiously motivated hate crimes in Massachusetts are against Jews. Think about that. So we decided to start with K through 12 education. The reason we decided to start with K through 12 education was fairly personal. Senator Vilas on the Senate side has a very young son. I have 4 very young sons. We know that this is something that's happening a lot. And the data was telling us that it was rising precipitously, and not around the time that our commission was forming, the Massachusetts Teachers Association started to come out with these fairly controversial trainings online for its members, and then some materials that were quite worrisome. And this was really, in the hearts and minds of the Jewish community across the state. And we knew that we couldn't do this commission without going after the issue on a K through 12 education basis. And so we decided we'd dive right into that. And so through about 9 hearings just on K through 12 education, well over 30 hours of hearings, we had experts come in, stakeholders, principals, teachers, students, folks from the Attorney General's office to talk about First Amendment rights, Dr. Miri Bar-Helpern, and I'm so glad I didn't have to go after her because she's amazing, came in. All sorts of folks come in to tell us about dealing with the issue on K through 12 education. So fast forward to the summer, and we came out with what is essentially a playbook for how the state apparatus, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and school districts ought to deal with the anti-Semitism that's coming up in our K through 12 schools. It was very specific. I'd say it was bold. And it was a playbook, as I said. What are the blocking and tackling tasks? And it turns out they were actually quite straightforward in most cases. A lot of the times it was just include the Jews in what you're doing. It's actually anti-Semitic not to do that, given that you have repeated incidents of anti-Semitism happening in your school community, and yet your DEI trainings do not include anti-Semitism or the Jews. Newsflash, that's not okay. So we take this thing to a vote. There are 19 special commissioners, all 18 who are there vote in favor, and they do so over the vigorous objection of the same folks who did not want a commission on combating anti-Semitism in the first place, okay? So we vote on these recommendations. The governor comes out and immediately endorses it. Our Attorney General Campbell, the House Speaker, the Senate President, Jake Auchincloss, Catherine Clark, Lori Trahan. It gets a lot of support right away, and we immediately start to see adherence to the principles, the practices that we're talking about how you message to the community. How does the principal or a superintendent write an email to the community after an anti-Semitic incident takes place? How is that reported? How do you deal with the whistleblower? How do you deal with bringing in educational resources? How do you reform your DEI trainings for teachers to make sure that they know how to address anti-Semitism? And how does DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, work through this on a curriculum level to make sure that our local school districts have the appropriate resources? And I'm so glad to say that the commissioner of DESE has been Pedro Martinez, our new commissioner, not the Red Sox player, has been a real ally, a really strong and thoughtful ally on this. Dr. Rubin just said he's been great, so you heard it from him. We are now moving on, and our commission will end on November 30th. I am a strong believer that it should end. We can talk about that later. We are now moving on to other topics: higher education, law enforcement, the workplace. We had chilling testimony about what's happening at our medical universities here in Massachusetts. Last week, we actually had an off-site, so we've now had 13 hearings. The 13th one, the bar mitzvah hearing, was where I had my bar mitzvah at Kerem Shalom Synagogue, and we invited in residents and medical professionals in the Commonwealth to talk about the anti-Semitism that's occurring in the medical profession now. So there's lots to tackle. We are coming out with our draft report for all of the subject matter areas on, I think I'm breaking news, on Friday this week. And you can, and I encourage you to take a look at
first.
that. You heard it here first in Franklin. And I encourage you to take a look at that because we do want your input, Mr. Lee.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. That's great. I have a few follow-up questions for the panelists here, and also you were handed cards and pens as you came in. If you have questions for the panel, this would be a great time to start jotting them down, because we're going to want to have you engage in this conversation as well. But let me go back to you, Jeremy, and if you could talk to us about what are some effective ways to combat anti-Semitism?
Excellent question. I'm going to start by echoing what Chair Cataldo touched on, which is that the commission is identifying and making a huge swath of recommendations on strategies and approaches to address anti-Semitism. The chair referenced at the last hearing, we heard from community groups. One of the most important things is actually the work of interfaith and community groups beyond the Jewish community. And we were very privileged to hear from two of them, one from Lexington and one from Concord at the last hearing.
You guys are not going to let me live that down either.
He's not. One of the things I often say is, so for the Jewish members of this audience, it is not the responsibility of the Jewish community to combat anti-Semitism. Our responsibility in the wake of rising anti-Semitism is to go on living vibrant Jewish lives and building vibrant Jewish communities. It is the responsibility of society, and this goes back to baked into the DNA of Western civilization, it is the responsibility of society to combat anti-Semitism. Now, we, the Jews in the room, I'll say this to you, we do have a responsibility here, which is to articulate to our friends and neighbors what we are experiencing. I do not make the assumption that my neighbor's lack of public voice on this is because they are an anti-Semite or because they don't care. I start from the assumption of they just don't know what I am experiencing, and if I share it with them, they have the opportunity to be a good ally. So so first and foremost, for the Jews in the room and for Jews watching this, our first responsibility is to share our experiences, to share how we are perceiving what is going on with our neighbors. Now to others, allies, we need to do a few things. One, we need to essentially make anti-Semitism socially unacceptable. And that is a huge problem. And some of it has to do with, and I've never even heard of that platform before, but the more, shall we say, commonly known platforms on social media are pretty awful too at this point. And the algorithms drive up toxic extremism. The algorithms drive people towards the worst voices. And by the way, they also affirm and elevate and validate those who are willing to say things that were socially unacceptable in a whole variety of ways 10 years ago. So we need to collectively come together and say, this is unacceptable. And when you have, and I'm going to say, for the people in the room who are involved politically, we need to say that extremists in our politics, people who use anti-Semitism as an organizing force in their work, and we see it here in Massachusetts, candidates for municipal office who use anti-Semitism as a driving factor in their messaging and in their communities, we need more mainstream, responsible political leaders to say that person's unacceptable, and I don't care if they're going to be the mayor of this town or a city councilor, they're unacceptable, and I'm not going to work with them, not just on hate, but I'm actually not going to validate and work with them as a partner on, say, their housing agenda or on their environmental agenda. We just have to make it unacceptable. Second, and I'll get off my horse after this one and pass the mic on to other questions. We need to call it out when it's politically inconvenient. Too much of our society has weaponized, particularly the United States right now, is weaponizing anti-Semitism when it serves partisan political purposes. Republicans love condemning anti-Semitism on the left. Democrats love condemning anti-Semitism on the right. I want to see more Democrats condemning anti-Semitism on the left, and I want to see more Republicans condemning anti-Semitism on the right. And I say that partially because, thank you. When it comes back to something baked into the DNA of Western civilization that is about conspiracy theories and Jewish power and our nefariousness or depravity, it's not that anti-Semitism only happens on one side of the ideological spectrum. It happens across the ideological spectrum. And frankly, wherever people are feeling like, I am downtrodden, my life is not going the way I want it to, the economy is, I have a lack of hope, and somebody's going to tell me who to blame for that lack of hope, inherently in Western civilization, part of the answer is the Jews. And not always only the Jews, the whole replacement theory, which is like Jews are secretly bringing in people from all over the third world, black and brown people, to take over the United States, but it's the Jews doing the bringing. So it's not always just about Jews, but that lack of hope. Why am I not better off than my parents? Somebody's going to tell me it's the Jews. And that can come from the left, it can come from the right, it can come from the center, it can come from, the Soviet Union had a grand anti-Semitic agenda, so did Nazi Germany. It's not a partisan thing, and we have to call it out, especially amongst those closest to us. And by the way, I'll give credit, Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz, who on 98% of things, last week gave a very important speech calling out the Republican Party for not doing enough to confront anti-Semitism on the right. And at least for that, he should be applauded. And I want to applaud more people on the left and not be frustrated when I see progressives tolerating or normalizing the kinds of anti-Semitism that happen on the left.
Let's go right down the line. I think that's a fabulous question. I'd like to hear thoughts from everyone. Rabbi Putterman?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to the non-Jews in the room is that when it's a very lonely, scary time to be Jewish. It's really scary. Members of my congregation, we're all scared. Walking down the street, it's scary, and it can feel very isolating because we're a tiny, tiny percentage of the population, and so. Reach out when something bad happens, like the shooting in DC or the firebombing in Colorado, or, these things really, really rattle us like profoundly. So please reach out. You showing up here today is amazing. Makes us feel a little bit better, a little bit safer. But reaching out to the Jews that when something bad happens, it really helps because the Jews in your life are hurting.
So true. I want to follow up on something Jeremy said, and part of this has to do, it's touched on in our special commission recommendations. So there is a movement across the country, mostly in far left communities and perhaps states, to boycott and divest Israel. And this is plainly illegal under federal law as discrimination, and something that really does, and kind of a lot of the ethos of that movement goes far beyond any kind of geopolitics, and is targeted at Jews or Israelis or people with a connection to Israel. And actually right now, very close to home, next week on the ballot in Somerville is going to be one of these plainly illegal under federal law BDS ballot measures that they're going to vote on. And I've talked to I don't represent Somerville. I've talked to a lot of Jews in Somerville who are scared. People with connections to Israel who are scared. People with businesses that have some business connection to some Israeli company that are scared and considering moving out. And so I would say this operates in response to your question on a couple of different levels. One, do we pass laws, regulations, enforce our laws in a way that avoids discrimination and complies with anti-discrimination law? That's on one side. But on the other side, do we have people just standing up and saying that's wrong, right? Like you do have to do both. You do have to do both when it comes to discrimination and hate. And so I think, I am so grateful to be living in this little bubble of a state legislature where I have so much support. Yes, from Leader Roy, but just from my colleagues writ large. And that is key, because our laws can only protect us so far when we don't have people who are willing to stand up and do exactly what Jeremy just said, call out the hypocrisy, on the left. Is it okay to have a Nazi SS tattoo for 20 years and know what it is, by the way, if we're being honest, and then just lie 20 years later and it gets excused? Is that okay? I would say no. I would say no. Okay? But there's no law. It's not illegal to get a Nazi tattoo. Okay? The power is in the people who say we're gonna support leaders who say that that's not the right thing, and we're not gonna accept anything less than that.
So one thing that I think when you go last, they tell you you're never supposed to repeat anything that anybody has already said. So thank you all for being brilliant and making this really hard. When we're talking about the response, I think one of the things that occurred last year when we had our incident of vandalism at our former location was that people were present. There's a sort of presence that is required that I think Rabbi Rachel was mentioning about reaching out and communicating with people when we think they're hurting. But there's also an acknowledgement, I think, for the people who are in the Jewish community that there is no right response. Some people are scared, some people are ambivalent, some people want to turn a blind eye and pretend that everything is okay, and some people like to retreat and not tackle issues because of any of a variety of factors. No one of those responses is more right than the other. And I think that's something that we all have to acknowledge, is that sometimes when people don't know how to respond, whether Jewish or not Jewish, it's okay. But we have a responsibility unto each other to help each other understand that when there is an incident like that happened at our temple, when I'm sitting when I walked out of that speaker last year and started the quote unquote crusade that I was on for a few months, one of my colleagues who's the principal at King Philip saw me walking out and put her hand out and said, "Are you okay?" And when I said no, she didn't try to minimize it. And she didn't try to tell me, well, get over it. She didn't mean it that way. There was a true empathy, and I think that's hard. I think empathy in these times in general is hard to practice. So recognizing that people's responses however they may be, to some of these incidents are real, they're okay, they may be visceral, they may be things that you can't see. I think that it's important for us all, Jewish or non-Jewish, to understand that. And I think the other part of it that is important for all of us to recognize is that there are sometimes people who want to have a voice that don't know how. And there are people who want to have a voice that are afraid to have a voice because they don't want to be on that island themselves. So that's where the power of a community is so important. Because I can tell you, being like the face of some of these challenging conversations, when I walked up to 900 Washington Street, I'm empowered by the fact that there were 98 families behind me. I was empowered by the fact that the Interfaith Council had already reached out to our rabbi. I was empowered by the fact that Representative Roy had already reached out to us and said, are you guys okay? Is there anything you need? So those little actions, when somebody's out there on the news saying this happened to us and it's not okay, you're not just the voice for you anymore. And that is so important in these small cloister of our communities, to know that we're not alone. And I think that's something that, whatever the response may be, recognizing that it's okay, recognizing that there's a sort of solidarity is critical.
Thank you so much. And I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Barr Halpern. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience. Talk to us about your area of expertise and what you have observed regarding the psychological impact.
Okay, thank you so much for having me, and I wish I was able to be there in person. Can you hear me okay, or is there an echo?
Oh, it's great. Yeah.
Perfect, okay. Whew. So my area of expertise is trauma. I'm not an expert in anti-Semitism like some of the esteemed panelists you have today. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I spent my career trying to understand how to help individuals who were victims of trauma and different levels of care. My dissertation was actually about how to help victims of terrorism and war. And that was before October 7th. Then October 7th happened, and out of my own fear reaction, I wrote a post in an Israeli Facebook group saying that this is my cell phone number, and if you need any support, give me a call. Not one of my best decisions. I got flooded with phone calls and was able to quickly mobilize a team of clinicians. And for over a year, we provided free support for the Israeli community, and then it extended to the greater Jewish community of Massachusetts. And out of these stories, I started hearing very similar stories to the ones I hear in my clinic from my non-Jewish trauma patients. And that's the concept of traumatic invalidation. And traumatic invalidation is a phenomenon that I did not coin. It was studied by Dr. Melanie Hernay and Dr. Marshall Linehan and Dr. Martin Bohas, big names in the trauma world. And it's when someone is minimizing your pain or your experience, when they're denying it or criticizing you or blaming you for it, when you have unequal treatment because of who you are. There are actually 9 criteria of traumatic invalidation, and throughout the stories and the data I collected in the last 2 years, I was able to prove with my co-author that the Jewish community actually made all 9 criteria for traumatic invalidation. Now, what that led to is that I took on a new hat, and I joined this fabulous organization, Parents for Peace, and they're fighting radicalization. So to your question is, what is my expertise? Now, I'm not only treating the victims of hate crimes, I'm also treating the perpetrators and radicalized individuals who actually commit some of those crimes. In terms of what I've been seeing in the community, and it's really interesting because we just finalized some of the results from our current study. So I'm going to share with you some very preliminary results. It was not published yet, but we conducted a huge study. And we show that traumatic invalidation is significant within the Jewish community. And more than that, it is highly correlated with PTSD symptoms, depression, and anxiety. And 97% of the people in our study actually said that they do not feel safe in the United States. And I know Simon mentioned before the healthcare crisis. We actually just held a huge conference in Massachusetts about anti-Semitism in healthcare. And this is absolutely the feeling that most people have, that they do not feel safe, that anti-Semitism is everywhere, or some people actually call it anti-Jewish racism. It's in the academia, it's in healthcare, and it's in K-12. And this is why I'm in this space. Like many of the panelists, it is very personal to me. I have 2 young kids in the public school system, and I've been seeing what the MTA, for example, is publishing, and I've been seeing the results in patients in my clinic where they are afraid to go to school. They have severe depression, anxiety. Some of them started to self-harm because of what they've been experiencing, and actually talking about suicidal ideation. There is a strong fear of expressing identity. There is a struggle with cultural pride. A lot of them feel shame. I had a client that told me they just don't want to be Jewish anymore, 14-year-old American Jewish girl. Another one, and this is kind of like the other aspect of it for Israelis, there's this double burden because not only they're experiencing anti-Semitism, they're also experiencing that burden of being an Israeli and being held accountable for what is the Israeli government is doing. And you don't see any other minority group, by the way, when you hold them to the same standard. You don't see people going after Russian people or Syrian people. It's very specific to Israelis. So for the Israeli community, the distress is even higher. And think about it, many Israelis immigrants came here after October 7th because they were displaced due to the war. Not only they need to manage being an immigrant in a different country, trying to make connection and social connection and studying in a different language, now they're also being bullied for being Jewish and for being Israeli. So when you think about traumatic invalidation, it basically compounds the trauma and it prevents someone from healing. It's a social trauma because we need our in-group. And when the society is rejecting us and criticizing us and attacking us, then they can really create a situation of life and death feeling for people. The criteria, by the way, for traumatic invalidation, and I know that you took a survey before, who's Jewish in the crowd, and if I was there, I would ask which one of you experienced any one of them. But part of it is ignoring. So that's when people are ignoring your pain, or when all the social justice warrior, they post about any other cause, but not about what happened on October 7th. Emotional neglect, when you're sharing your response or telling your friend, I don't feel safe, and their reaction is, no, it's not that big a deal. What about? Kind of like that gaslighting or whataboutism. The criticizing, those are, you're dirty Zionist or you bloodthirsty Jew. Misinterpreting. When I give talks now, because I'm Jewish, if I talk to a non-Jewish crowd, I actually have to say that I'm pro-Palestinian and I'm pro-Israeli. I'm just not pro-Hamas. And it's always mind-blowing to me that people assume that because I'm Israeli, I automatically am against Palestinian, because I spent 20 years of my life being a trauma advocate for everybody. But because I'm Israeli, they just assume that. Some other ones are denying reality. So that's when you might be talking about an anti-Semitic incident and they're telling you, no, it's just criticism of the Israeli government. Or if you're sharing your pain about October 7th, or actually just talking about October 7th and people are telling you it didn't really happen, like we've seen with the sexual assault that happened on October 7th. Controlling, when someone else is controlling your narrative and defining for you what is anti-Semitism when you wouldn't define it to any other minority group, what is racism or what is any type of bias against them. Excluding a ton of students in K-12 and higher education, and in the healthcare world actually, are being excluded from groups unless they're denouncing that they're against Israel. Many of the students that I'm seeing in my clinic told me that they would not be invited to parties. In higher education, I think it's also devastating when you go to college and the social experience is such a big part of being on college, and they're actually being excluded. And also from labs, I had a patient that told me that her roommates kicked her out because she was pro-Israeli, and they started wearing keffiyeh and going to protest, and they told her not going to collaborate with her on a lab anymore. And in the healthcare field, especially the mental health field, unfortunately, which is why I feel so betrayed, there are lists of Zionist therapists not to refer to. In fact, there was a conference, an international conference in DBT, where there was a slide that was describing the colonizer brain. And on that slide, it says Zionism culture, rape culture, war culture. An international conference. So we're seeing it really everywhere, and that leads to unequal treatment as well. So a lot of patients are afraid of seeking help. The way I see traumatic invalidation, it's the silence wound. It's what you don't see right away. It's the people that might be afraid to reach out. And that can lead to a lot of chronic mental health issues, like I mentioned before, depression and anxiety, but also this constant hypervigilance and pervasive insecurity. So silence is never neutral anymore. When people are silent next to someone who is Jewish, they might interpret that as, wait, are you against me? Are you going to attack me? Or are you actually with me and just don't know what to say? And then there's also this unrealistic standard. If only I'll be the good Jew, maybe they will accept me. If only I'll say that I'm against Israel, then maybe I will be accepted in community, or maybe they will value my opinion. And I know this is more about K to 12, so one of the things that I really want to highlight is the brain. So we know from trauma studies that when someone is under constant distress and anxiety, that part of the brain, if I can get nerdy for a second, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain, it's all about executive functioning and problem solving. It cannot function very well. It actually shuts down because the limbic brain, that fight, flight, freeze response, takes over. So when you have a Jewish student in your class right now, you can assume that they're not going to function academically to the same level that their peer who is not Jewish might be functioning as well. So it's something that it's more than just hate. It's really a mental health issue, and it needs to be treated as a public health issue. And I'll make one more comment, and then I'll bring it back to you. So the organization I work with that fight against radicalization, one of the things I've learned from them, and we have a helpline that people can call and say, I'm worried about my loved one being radicalized, and we collect data about it. And we get phone calls from about every single ideology you can think of, far left, far right, Antifa, eco-terrorism. What they all have in common is anti-Semitism. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because what I wanted non-Jewish people in the room to understand is that anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem. It is a non-Jewish problem. It's affecting the Jewish people mental health, but it's affecting everybody because it is the gateway to radicalization. We know from studies that people that are more vulnerable in general to hate crime and specifically to anti-Semitism will then commit other crimes as well. This is not just a slogan. We actually have the data to show that. And I actually work with families that their lives have been ruined, non-Jewish families, because the kid is in jail right now where it started with anti-Semitism and it ended in the far, far, far left or the far, far, far right.
Well, let me say thank you. That was a great way to wrap up. It's a great way to segue now. This is your opportunity, folks. I think this panel was absolutely outstanding, and I can't thank you enough for coming out here and being with us in Franklin and spreading some strategies and some information that I think is going to go a long way. And again, let's give it up for our panelists. Now, Kathy and Mary are coming around to grab any cards from any questions. I'm not sure how you could have any questions with the wealth of information that was covered here tonight, but if you have them, raise your hand and they will take your questions and we will get them to the panel. Anybody have any questions? Here we go. Thank you, Connie. You come right up to this microphone here, Mary. And
Where can we read the playbook of the K through 12 work of the Commission on Anti-Semitism?
Excellent question. You have two options. You have two options. You can visit the state's website, and there's a list of commissions. You'll get to fact check me, and you'll see how many commissions there are on this list. And one of them is a special commission on combating anti-Semitism. And you can find there, Connie, not just what will probably be about a 57-page playbook on combating anti-Semitism. You can see every recording for all of our meetings, all of our meeting materials, and all that stuff. And if you can't find that, you should email jeffrey.roy at mahouse.gov. He will respond to you in approximately 60 to 90 minutes, no matter what time of day you email him.
you see why I sit next to him? Thank you, Simon. And truthfully, if you can't find it, just let me know. I will make sure you get it. Other questions? Raise your hand if you have a question. I see some pens at work. We'll gather them as soon as you are done and ready. Anybody else needs a card or a pen? Absolutely. And while we are taking some time for questions, Dr. Bar Halpern has an answer to a previous question. Here we go.
Thank you. So one of the most effective ways, in my opinion, to reduce anti-Semitism is a layered approach where we combine education, policy, and community resilience. And you have a panel of people that really represent all of that. I really want to stress the importance of having a trauma-informed school. We know what it means to be trauma-informed. There's 4 R's in it, and your school system should know that, and we can hold schools accountable. But for allies, what we need from you is to be in the room when we're not in the room, meaning speak up when we're not there. We need you to be upstanders. The power of a community is so important, especially because, like you heard before, a lot of people are afraid. You have people on the stage right now and me on Zoom that are not afraid to speak up, but that comes with a cost. And hopefully my fellow panelists are doing a ton of self-care. And if not, I'm going to talk to you later. But it's so important to be able to rely on people that really understand the problem. Educate yourself what it means to be Jewish. I just did a training in one of the school districts, and someone asked me, what does it mean Jewish is an ethno-religion? And we had to go over it. Connect with Jewish organization, a vetted Jewish organization, and not a tokenized Jewish organization, and I'm not going to mention the names right now. And make sure that Jewish and as a minority are also part of the DEI world. And when you speak with a Jewish person, don't preach. I always say, preach, don't preach. Lean in with curiosity and really try to understand their experience, the primary emotion, the sadness. You might be seeing anger, which is secondary emotion, or fear. Try to really lean in and try to listen to what they're saying. I think as a society, we're so quick to respond, so we forgot how to listen, because now we're listening just to respond and not really understand. Take the time to understand and ask the person, what can I do to help you? Do you feel safe? And if you don't feel safe, what can I do to make sure that you do feel safe? Asking those questions are really important. And repair. It's okay if we make mistakes, we're all human beings, but making sure that we can also repair, especially as modeling it to others and in the education world, I think is a must. And that goes to both anti-Semitism and radicalization, by the way.
Thank you once again. We have another question.
This might be for Dr. Rubin. How do you help your child who expresses that her teacher has made anti-Israel comments in the classroom?
Boy. So I'm going to assume the student is an accurate reporter first. And I think one of the things that we sometimes have to deal with students is helping the adults understand that student perception is reality. If the student feels that in fact was something that was hateful, or that the teacher said something that was off color, that's reality. And that's sometimes hard for adults to hear. So the first step to me is discussing the context with the student and having as much information as a parent or as a trusted adult for that kid that you could possibly have. Helping the student with self-advocacy is something that's just important to me personally. So I always try, if a parent were to call me as a principal, and I'm speaking now as a principal and not a parent, if a parent calls me, I'm going to ask to speak with them with their student there. The student now has a trusted adult in the room. Whether it's a parent, I might say, if you can't make it in, are you comfortable with a counselor? And I try and gather as much information as possible. And then, it really is a matter of determining the extent to which that statement may or may not be validated. And then you have to confront it, administratively straight on. If a teacher were to say something that was off color about slavery, or if a student were to say something off color about someone's sexual identity, we would be having a very difficult conversation, and we would treat this no differently. And I think it's about helping the student find their voice in that matter too, because to me it's incredibly important that the student feels empowered to be able to say to the adults, hey, look, this made me uncomfortable, and not just that it made me uncomfortable, but why? Because that's the skill that the kid's going to take with them into the next level. Now, the other side of this, and this is again going back to the culture of the school, is the response of the adult is incredibly important. The response of the administrator, and this is where, as a parent, if you call that administrator and it gets either dismissed or blown off or ignored, you have to have the courage to keep going. I personally don't ignore any statement that comes my way, difficult as it may be. There is, believe it or not, there are people who would like to say, no, don't worry about it, it didn't really happen. No, it happened. I mean, again, there's sometimes testing the veracity of the reporter and trying to figure out the extent to which it happened, but people need to feel heard. People need to be heard, and then it needs to be responded to with consistency. But the single most important thing to me is always making sure that that student feels that their voice has been affirmed.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So after, doing over 40 hours of hearing and talking to all these principals and students and teachers, what you just heard is an extremely enlightened response, which is not to be presumed is the baseline or what's common among school leaders, not out of malice, but out of maybe not knowing how to do. So just as an example, but the silver lining to that, and is a very important silver lining, is with the proper support and guidance, I really believe that our school leaders can get there. So just one quick example, in Concord, where I live, and Concord. The country started there. I have a very good relationship with our school superintendent, and there was a swastika that was drawn on a skateboard park on school property. There was a lot going on at that time at the school. There was a tragedy that had happened. 3 kids died at the high school in a tragic car accident. Anyway, there's a lot swirling around, and protocol was not followed, and it was not reported. It was painted over. About 6 weeks later, we had our town meeting, and somebody at the local paper got wind of this and went up to the police chief in Concord and said, what is the town doing about the swastika? Which, by the way, is a hate crime, okay? You deface property with swastika, that is a hate crime under Massachusetts law. And he said, what swastika? He didn't know. The police department hadn't been told. No one had been told, okay? So that's bad. So anyway, there's a bunch of issues. There's an ADL complaint that you may have seen because it made national and international news against the Concord school system for anti-Semitic bullying. We come out with our K through 12 recommendations. They take these very seriously. Unsurprisingly, the first day of school, there is a swastika in the school bathroom at the high school. The first day of school. Before the school day is over, the principal has written an email that has all of the hallmarks of gold standard communication, commends the person who came forward, says the word Jewish and anti-Semitic, which a lot of these communications from school leaders do not do in like blatantly anti-Semitic incidents, right? They say we condemn all hate, right? When it's anti-Semitism. So she does that. She provides resources from Project Shema and the ADL on how to talk to your kid about this. And she provides transparent next steps on how the school is doing this, is going to deal with this, right? That's how much change we can see. So not all schools have Dr. Rubin at the helm, but we can really make a lot of positive change. And that's a point that I hope you will take away from this. But the reason all that happened was not because the state rep was Jewish, okay, in that community. It was because there was a groundswell of support. A group rose up called Conquer Carlisle against anti-Semitism. There was a rally with 300 people on the town common. Nobody knew who the Jews were. I mean, you work in Uxbridge. There's not a lot of Jews. There's not a ton of Jews in Franklin. I'm from Concord. There's not a lot. There's not Newton or Brookline or even Marblehead or Swampscott. Not only are there not a lot of Jews, but the Jews don't know who each other are, typically, right? And a lot of times in communities like this. And so it does require the Jews and their allies, which is why the Interfaith Council is so important, to require adherence at the leadership level. And I hope you take that away from this, because it's a really good part of this story, and it's change that we're seeing already in Massachusetts.
Great, thank you. And I know Councilor Cormier Ledger had a question. I don't know if you got it from him.
And I don't remember which one was his, but
Okay.
I'm gonna read one anyway.
All right.
How can we work with Christian leaders in our community to change the passages said in church during Palm Sunday Mass? The anti-Jewish hate starts there and at a very young age. There must be a way to teach history and celebrate our religion without blaming Jews for something that happened over 2,000 years ago.
Do you want it? Okay. I very much appreciate the question, and I'm going to actually, on behalf of the entire panel, sort of push it back to the person who asked it. Only in the sense that I don't think 4 Jews sitting up here on a panel, 5 including Miri, are really best positioned to tell a Christian leader or Christian leaders how to navigate the internal theology and sort of the church, and how that theology gets lived and expressed, other than to say, that's on the church to figure out. And I think it's on any church. And by the way, today is the 60th anniversary of Nostra Aetate, which was the Catholic Church coming to terms with its own history of anti-Semitism and fundamentally laying out a new relationship that it would hold with the Jews around the world today, 60 years ago. It was a profound moment in Christian history. It was important for the Jews, but it was a profound moment in Christian history. And I would just say to that question, not knowing whether that particular person was thinking of any particular denomination, that is the work of the Christian community to do. Some of us are available to be resources or guidance, at least to talk about how we experience things. The larger thing I would say, and here I'm going to speak, and maybe I'm going to overstep on the rabbi here, but I am going to speak as a person of faith. Our faith community, and by the way, not all Jews are faith, and I wouldn't call us a religion, and that's a whole other conversation. We are a community, a people, a tribe that happens to have a particular faith that we affiliate with if we have faith. But as one of the people who has a faith approach, we've got stuff in our tradition that's messy too. I will say on a personal level, I mentioned earlier that I'm part of the LGBTQ community. I am also the founder of a synagogue in the Orthodox tradition. And in the Orthodox tradition, on Yom Kippur, our most solemn day, we read a section from the Bible in services in the afternoon, in which it talks about all sorts of sexual sins. And there's the passage about, stone the gays. We read it in service in the afternoon on Yom Kippur in our congregation. And there was a debate, and there are different congregations that grapple like, oh, we shouldn't read it anymore. And my attitude and our attitude was like, it's part of our tradition. It's part of the culture and the tradition of what we do on this particular solemn day. We're going to read it. We're not going to pretend it's not part of the Bible, but we are going to read it in a way that you have to confront the implications and impact on real living people in our day-to-day lives. And so every year during the reading, I go stand right in front of the Torah so that everybody has to see some of the gay people in the synagogue standing there as it's being read. And I would just say, I don't want to invalidate church tradition. I don't want to suggest my opinion is that the church should stop engaging with its texts. and lifting them up and having it in the tradition. I would encourage, if a Christian minister was asking my opinion, I would encourage them to think about how do we engage it in terms of its practical lived reality without denying that it's part of our tradition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, this is for Rep. Cataldo. I knew about issues of anti-Semitism, textbooks, etc., in Newton schools. Are these a common problem in Massachusetts? If so, how is the commission dealing with it? And how is the commission dealing with the teachers union regarding anti-Semitism?
This is an explosive one.
So many
isn't
hot
it?
potatoes. All right. So with respect to curricula writ large, the special commission has made recommendations to DESE to take a look at this topic. And actually part of the statute that we enacted and that Leader Roy led on to create the commission also required the state's Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to create a rubric on anti-Semitism and societal bias. The draft of that rubric was released about 2 weeks ago, and the special commission is now weighing in and engaging DESE in giving feedback to that. The public comment component is open until December 1st. And so I'd encourage anybody to email jeffrey.roy. No, you can find this pretty easily using Google. You can email me and I'll show you how to give the feedback on that. But we're taking a very close look at that now. And DESE has been a fantastic partner on that. I am also very concerned about curriculum. I'm very concerned about the insertion of political or ideological views that are discriminatory against Jewish kids or any other type of kid. And with respect to the MTA, I'll just be very direct about it, as we've always been on the special commission, the Mass Teachers Association, which is the largest teachers union in Massachusetts and actually the largest union in New England. The leadership of that union has a particular ideological perspective that caused it to create and distribute to its 117,000 members virulently anti-Semitic material for classrooms, including things like workbooks for children that had them calling Zionist bullies before they could read, asking them how to fill out a workbook to tell them how they were going to free a child who was being bullied by the Zionists, what they were going to chant at protests, and how they were going to give money to the children of Palestine so they could retake their land. Okay? Things that had the conspiracies of the Rothschilds and all this type of stuff as curriculum for kids and for teachers. So what did we do? We decided we were going to just bring them into the commission. And we're going to put the stuff up on the screen and we're going to ask them to defend it. It didn't go well for them. Shocker. Right? And so immediately the Boston Globe editorial board condemned it. The governor condemned it, told them to take it down. And we had, again, unflinching support. And so this supposedly all-powerful union was not so powerful in that moment. I am a state representative. I'm not a union member. I was a special education teacher and a member of a teachers union, but I'm not anymore. I don't have a vote. I don't want to vote. It's really for the teachers to decide. Meanwhile, as their political power slips away in the State House because they want to engage in these kind of ideological sideshows, and as their own members get mad at them, and Rep. Roy may have had a similar experience. The teachers, the actual rank and file teachers, they want nothing to do with this nonsense, right? But that's what it is. I don't, it's not my job to replace the leadership of the teachers union. It was my job to say, hey, this is what's happening. The state needs to take a stronger role to make sure that there's not this vacuum of ignorance that's going to be filled by actors who maybe aren't the most responsible. And so that's why the special commission is stepping in to fill that void and make sure that districts, teachers, administrators are supported in having curriculum that's appropriate. And because of the special commission and the work that Desi is doing, there's a lot more help on that issue, both on anti-Semitism itself, but also on the Middle East conflict.
Everything that the chair said, and I keep calling the chair because I'm a member of the commission, and that was a hearing. But I want to take it down, and I want to take it down another level because the practical on a town by town level, and I know that the chair agrees with me on this because we've talked about it. One of the things that happened after that hearing, after the MTA's curriculum sort of got a national spotlight on it, was individual school committees around the state started stepping up and saying, we don't want this taught in our classrooms. And your opportunity, your work as a local community is how do you engage with your school committee? At the end of the day, the state provides some frameworks. They're incredibly broad frameworks in education. School committees have a much more active hand in society, choosing what are the textbooks we're going to have in our schools? What are the top, work with us, work to support our teachers in addressing current events. And the school committees in a number of places, in Brookline, in Swampscott, a couple other places, Marblehead, Framingham. So Natick, thank you. He's good. He has it all like right there. Trial lawyer, by the way, on top, which is a good thing. These school districts, the school committee stepped up, passed resolutions, and said, we, as this school committee, the standards in our district, this is not going to get taught, this material that the MTA is pushing. You can engage with your school district. Your school committee can step up and say, not in our district, not in our classrooms, certain things, we do better here.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions?
We have a quick follow-up about the play-by-play book for the special commission.
All right.
So I am Jewish, and my daughter is a freshman at the high school. She's actually dealt with a couple of incidents of anti-Semitism. I will say that Franklin has dealt with it really nicely. I feel it was dealt with very well, except for I didn't realize about the letter going out to the community. And there was an incident where a small swastika was drawn on a desk that she found in a study. And they did a great job saying, like, glad you stuck up for yourself. I'm glad you came to us. And but I'm not sure if there was any letters sent, or I kind of want to send something to the administrator and just say, this is exactly what should have happened. And I do think it is about being uneducated and not really understanding or what should be done, which kind of leads. So I wanted to ask, is that in the commission online?
So we are, one of our recommendations, and I'm so sorry that that's happened to your daughter. I hope it doesn't diminish her pride in being Jewish, and she's in really good company. Sorry?
She's loud and proud.
That's great. Good for her. I love that. And it is one of the things that's happened after October 7th. That we are seeing a lot more pride and solidarity and some more reflection on what it means to be Jewish and how lucky we are to be Jewish. So one of the things that we are doing is we are lifting up some of the positive examples of school districts that make extremely clear of what a parent or student is to do in your situation. And so we have, again, actually, this is an example of Concord Carlisle has developed just over the course of months. And I was emailing some of my colleagues yesterday because I think it's Revere, Hopkinton, Concord Carlisle, and Brookline, in various different ways, have very good and transparent procedures that if you're just a parent, and you want to say, what do I do in this situation? I want to give feedback, or something didn't go right, or I want to report something that my daughter feels too scared to tell an adult at the school. Here's what to do. It's important that that is on the school's website. There needs to be a play-by-play. And so this is actually something that's very straightforward, and there are examples of schools in the Commonwealth that are doing this quite well. So I would say that if it's to you as a resourceful parent, if it's not obvious, that means that there's something the district can be doing that it is not doing right now, but it could quite easily do. I hope that's sufficient as an answer.
This is great. We keep building off each other. That's what we do. The work of the commission, and it does bear repeating and lifting up. It is profound and unique that we are the first in the nation to have this kind of effort by our state government, and as the chair referenced, with really the broad, unanimous support of the state's political leadership. And I don't think we can take for granted as a Jewish community how profound that is that our state government fully stepped up and said, we're going to shine a spotlight on this. We're going to put state resources into shining a spotlight and developing this playbook. And the work of the commission is going to end at the end of this month. And it's going to be on all of us to work on the implementation. We can't just leave it to DESE, the Department of Education. We can't just leave it to a principal or a superintendent. It's going to be a whole of society needs to be focused on implementation. One of the things I very much appreciate about at least the draft that I am aware of, what I've seen and what's coming, there's a lot of things that's very specific in terms of timelines, in terms of metrics, in terms of measurability, so that any community group can say, here are some recommendations that within the next year, school districts should go engage with your superintendent, go engage with the school board chair. You can do that work yourselves as a community to say, here are the things, here are some timelines. We want to be part of the implementation in our school district. And then I'll throw in a plug for us at JCRC, and you can go to jcrcboston.org. We run a K through 12 initiative with support from the Center for Combating Anti-Semitism of Combined Jewish Philanthropies. And our focus specifically is supporting parent engagement in public schools and supporting superintendents and administrators in the implementation of this work. And for us, the roadmap ahead, and you can go there, we're having a convening this week for superintendents and principals to really focus on how can they take this content and start to implement it in their districts. And we're going to be there for the long haul as a partner to those districts who want to do the work and as a partner to those parents who want to work with their school boards to implement this material. And you all need to be part of that work in your own district. You can't just wait for the state to solve the problem. You actually need to engage.
Well, that's a...
What's the website?
JCRC, that's my organization, boston.org. Real simple, and there's a K through 12 pull down. You can learn more.
Well, is that a question? You're gonna be our closing question for the evening?
I have one more question.
Oh, you do? Okay, let's take the question first.
Okay, last question of the evening. Is basic religious education about Judaism and other religious traditions for that matter an important strategy for addressing anti-Semitism? And if so, how do we advocate for this education without being anti whatever other religion it is?
So when we get to, if we want to get into, there's a really brief solution to it. We actually have a couple of different units in, so when we revamped, I'll give a little bit more detail. When we revamped our social studies sequence, we did away with like the traditional, like you take world history in grade 9 and then you take like a year of US history and a year of US history, and then your senior year you go to an elective. In our particular program, and I'm not advocating that this is the only solution, but it's one that works, is we actually do a thematic study. We call it Global 1, Global 2, and Global 3. So there's US history that's integrated into all of it, which is important because US history is one of the competency determinations of the Commonwealth. But it also allows us a lot of latitude to study Eastern civilization, which is not necessarily something that was really infused into the history experience that I had as a student. We do a lot of the comparative religion unit, which gives just a factual and sociological understanding for kids about different cultures that are out there. And it's done very objectively. And I think one of the keys is that there is a way to teach about religion without proselytizing. Those are two very different things. And we made a commitment to that specifically because I work in a district that is 89 to 92% Caucasian and doesn't have a lot of understanding of the other. And to be honest, some of our great partnerships for the kids has come from the faith leaders in the community who are then able to support that in some of their work with the kids in Sunday school or in part of their confirmation classes. And I could say this: we have a really strong relationship with the Catholic pastor I work in Uxbridge. When I worked in Medway, Monsignor Moran was a terrific resource for us in that regard. So when we talk about teaching religion, there's teaching religion and culture as part of a thematic context and not necessarily the proselytization, and that helps students see the other. And when we have teachers who are uncomfortable with it, we bring in guest speakers. Let them hear from people like that boy did that day in the office who are part of the other.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I know that you wanted to either make a comment, and I know Ted had a follow-up question, so let these two, but please be mindful. It's almost 9 o'clock, and if you can keep it to 30 seconds, that would be great. So start with you.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
Great to see you, Jeff.
And
Thank
you are responsible for Dr. Mary Bar Halpern being here, so give her a round of applause for helping out with that.
She's my dear friend from Israel. Thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you, everyone, for joining here in Town Council. There is one thing that I'm missing here tonight, and I would like to ask you, Jeff, for a follow-up meeting in the community. The head of the school committee, Lucas, is not here tonight. We had a lot of incidents in school that are related in schools, including when my daughter was in middle school and high school, and the school administration handled it very well. When October 7 hit, I had to send an email and ask them to send a communication to the parents because the charter school did, and the school committee did not do until we asked them to come out with a communication, explain what our community is going through. There was a lot of things that covered here tonight that needs to be enforced, needs to be led through the school committee. And them not being here today, maybe it's a conflict, lack of knowledge, but to me that's a mess. And I would like to see this as a next step for us to take what we've learned here today, bring it to the school committee so our kids will stay safe.
Thank you so much, and I will follow up with you. Ted, you get the final question.
It's not really a question. I just thought I should put my earlier question into a little bit of context for folks that maybe didn't understand. First of all, thank you for doing this. Thank you for coming together for Franklin. As a non-Jew, I can say that I try my hardest to understand people from all faiths and how we can all work together and live together and raise families together and make this a better lived experience. But I think it's important, as I said in my question, I don't think this falls on Jewish people to teach. I think this truly falls on Christian leaders to figure out a way to change the narrative. Because I can go back to 1980, sitting in Catholic Church in Medford. You know, we were all Italian. I didn't know a single Jewish person. And every single Palm Sunday, and that was a gigantic parish, 10,000 parishioners, right? Every single Palm Sunday we went through that, I'm just going to call it horrific portrayal of what happened to Jesus that day, and we had to read as if we were Jews chanting, "Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him." That happened every year for all those years I was a kid, and it created a sense of, I hate those people for what they did, and I'd never met them. And I didn't meet my first Jewish friend until 9th grade in high school, and we did Fiddler on the Roof together. And I remember saying sort of casually, "Oh yeah, the Jews killed Jesus." And she looked at me and she said, "What?" And I didn't think anything of it. And then all of a sudden, an incredible conversation and learning happened. And then I started getting invited to bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs and having all kinds of Jewish friends, because the little Catholic kid from South Medford actually cares about what we're all about. And that has led to me having some incredible Jewish friends and Jewish relationships throughout my adult life. I think there is a way that even if those passages have to be said for historic context, that, like you said, it can be explained, it can be taught with passion, and it can help bridge some of these divides that the community is feeling, because that was 40-something years ago. And those messages are still being taught, and those little kids are still hearing that stuff. And the pastors are not taking the time. I'm sorry to my Christian leaders in the audience, but they're not taking the time to explain it or do the follow-up. And then families are going home reliving this thing that happened 2,025 years ago. And I just think there's an onus and a responsibility on us to figure out a way to change that, learn from it, grow from it, and figure out how to move on. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ted. And before we wrap up, I just want you to know I just got a text indicating that the school committee is meeting now, and that's why they're not here tonight. But we, town hall is not too far away from here. But I want to say thank you for being here, for being attentive, for a very civilized conversation about a very important topic. I urge you, Franklin TV has been recording this program tonight. Tell your friends about this program. Urge them to watch it. Sit there and watch it with them if you are so willing. But it's an important message that needs to be spread throughout the community, and we'll continue this conversation. And finally, I want to thank the panelists who came here in person, and Dr. Mary Barhalpern, who appeared on Zoom, for being with us tonight and sharing their knowledge. This is the first of many conversations, and we'll keep it going. Again, thank you. Good night.
This program was made possible by your Franklin friends and neighbors, good folks just like you. Thanks for supporting Franklin TV. And thanks for watching.